Lachard Binkley. I'm the co-host of Rockets Fuel Podcast. And in today's Rockets Fuel Podcast, we're joined by Craig Ackerman, of course, the voice of the Houston Rockets. He joins us to talk Rockets Summer League, Rockets offseason moves, and expectations coming up for next season. So make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure that you are liking us and hitting that notification. And hopefully you enjoyed the show.
Got to get it in. Justice Smith. Jabari for three and the win. Yeah! He got it!
We are here to fuel your Rockets news. It's the Rockets Fuel Podcast. Of course, I'm your co-host, Lachard Binkley. You can always find me on Twitter at Binkley Hoops. And you can find my written work over at SB Nation or The Dream Shake. And of course, you see we have a very special guest. But before we introduce him, I want to give my co-host a chance to introduce himself.
Hey, what's up, y'all? It's Vator. You can find me at Vator_H-Town on Instagram and also Twitter. And man of the hour, Mr. Craig Ackerman.
Hey, fellas, how you doing?
Well, you're doing well, and we just want to get right into it. Of course, you are the longtime voice of the Houston Rockets and the voice of our intro, as you just heard.
Appreciate that. Thank you, hat tip.
Yes, and we appreciate you coming back on. We've had you on before, and we talked a lot about your career the first time we had you on. But I want to ask you, kind of just kicking it off, starting off with, could you just let the fans know? Because a lot of people don't know you've been in the Rockets organization for a long time, a lot longer than most people know. Can you just talk a little bit about that, before we get into like the summer league play and off season?
Yeah, as I do this, I date myself. But yeah, I started as an intern when I was 20 in 1994. Obviously, that was a good year because it was the second of those back-to-back championships. So it was a pretty awesome introduction to everything. Served as an intern until I finished up school and graduated in 97. Started working with the Rockets in full-time in the fall of 97 in the broadcast department, and also produced our games on the radio. Did games at U of H and Rice along the way, the Comets, the Texas Terror / Thunder Bears, the Arena Football League team as time went on. And then became sort of full-time Rockets broadcast guy in 2003, did pre-half and post-game shows on the radio. And then in 2008, Gene and Jim retired. I was promoted into full-time radio play-by-play then. And then 7-8 years ago, Bill Worrell decided to cut back on his travel schedule. So I started splitting TV duties. And then a couple of seasons ago, when Bill ultimately retired, I moved into TV full-time. So here I am. I think this will be season 29 or season 30 for me, something like that, with the Rockets coming up. So there you go in a nutshell. That's been my long run with Houston, with the Houston Rockets.
And I think I communicated this to you at the draft party when I bumped into you, but I remember when Gene Peterson retired, and I remember thinking nobody is going to be able to replace that man because he is such a legend. He has some of the most historic calls over the airwaves. If you are from Houston, you know what I'm talking about. But I just want to tell you, man, you came in, and it's hard to replace a legend, and I feel like you did so seamlessly. You brought an energy to the airwaves where it gets kind of tedious sometimes. I don't know how often people these days even listen to stuff on the radio anymore, but it's kind of hard to listen to on air radio broadcasts sometimes. It's not always very interesting, but you kept it exciting. You always had something witty to say, something funny to say. And then when you moved into the TV arena, it was just it was very seamless. So I just want to say thank you for just being you and just bringing that energy to the Houston Rockets.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It means a lot. There's a saying in this business that you don't want to be the guy who replaces a legend. You want to be the guy who replaced the guy who replaced the legend, because a lot of times, a lot of people don't ultimately ever accept the one who steps in after somebody who's been with the organization, beloved for as long as both Gene, Jim, and Bill have been. But I've been very fortunate to be given those opportunities, and thank you very much. I like to think that on some level, I've made something of it, but yeah, it's been an honor to be in this position. There's not a day that goes by that I take this job for granted, and what it means, and where I ultimately started to where I am now. Frankly, it still seems so very surreal.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And you're just talking about how you've been doing it for such a long time, and I mean, just past 3 seasons. I mean, you've been through some years, and we have as Rockets fans where they were rebuilding. Right after Akeem left, went to Toronto. The rebuilding years and then after Yao and Tracy left, they started rebuilding again. But these last 3 years, kind of just leading into this off season. How has it been for you these last 3 years? Because I mean, as fans, sometimes, they can tune out and not have to pay attention to the game or a game they don't want to watch. But I mean, this is your job. This is something you have to do day in and day out, travel with the team. I mean, how has it been for these last 3 years? And how much of a difference you think it's going to be this season now that the focus has kind of been shifted to winning and not rebuilding?
Well, look, obviously the last 3 seasons this has been one of the winningest franchises in the league for a quarter century up until the last 3 seasons. So from that perspective, it has been different. It has been a bit of a different challenge as well. But look, I personally have no control over how the team plays,
Yeah.
what decisions are made, what decisions aren't made, how many games they win, how many games they don't win. My role is to, I think, inform and entertain the best I possibly can with the product that I have to deal with. Obviously, winning makes everybody's job and life easier, myself included, especially, ownership, front office, coaches, players. Winning makes everybody enjoys winning more than losing. But quite honestly, even though the last 3 years, the Rockets have had the worst record in the league over that 3-year span, I've still had a blast. I get paid to call hoops. And so there are very few people in the entire world who have this opportunity. So again, I look at it under the perspective of I have no control over how the team performs. So my job is to do the best I possibly can. I try to be as honest as I possibly can with what I think what I see, pretty much everybody else sees. I try to, I never get personal. And so in these down years, I don't get personal, but I think I have to be factual. So if the team is not playing well, they're not shooting well, or certain things aren't going well, I think I have an obligation sort of point those things out. But even though it has not been as easy as it previously has been over these last 3 years, because they haven't won many games, I still love what I do. I still get really excited and hyped up to do every single game, because to me, every single game is just different, right? I mean, and that's what's so unique about this job, which I've always considered the next best thing to actually playing a sport. And so, no, I still love what I do. I am very much looking forward, though, I will admit, to this team turning the corner, which they will obviously be significantly better this upcoming season. How much so, I guess we'll soon all find out. I guess that's primarily, in my opinion, and I think the opinion of many people, contingent upon how much of a step forward all these young guys can make this next season. But no, whether they win 20 games or they win 60 games, I still get up and prepare and enjoy my job as much as ever. But yes, ultimately winning makes everybody's life easier.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure like some of your like most iconic calls so far. I mean, like you said, we've been a winning franchise for probably like the duration of the time that you've been with the team until recently. But
there was a couple of down years, I guess. There was the Steve that you mentioned, the transition years after Hakeem left, and then the Steve Francis season where he had Meniere's disease, and but even then, I think that season, I still think they won like, was it 28 games or something?
Yeah, they still won 28 games. Yeah,
and they ended up winning the lottery, and so things quickly sort of the feeling around the organization quickly changed thereafter. And then you mentioned the transition seasons, the 3 seasons after Yao and T-Mac ultimately could never get on the floor with one another, which I think was one of the great disappointments in recent franchise history, is that they had 2 guys that I thought when they put them together was like, oh my God, the Rockets have the new Kobe and Shaq combo. But ultimately they never just could share the floor because they never were healthy together. Even those seasons, the Rockets finished right outside of the lottery. I mean, right outside of the playoffs each and every season. I think the Rockets it was like the best 3-year run in NBA history without making the playoffs. And so even those 3 seasons compared to these 3 seasons were vastly different. But no, I still love my job. It's still a lot of fun. It's my job to try to do the best that I possibly can with the product that I have to work with. And that's what I try to do.
Hey, Craig, speaking of the T-Mac and Yao years, when T-Mac got hurt, I know you remember, I'm gonna take us down a trip. You remember who replaced him in the lineup for a lot of those games?
It's my guy, Von Wafer.
Von Wafer, your guy.
Not a cookie, not a cracker.
Yeah. I feel like that was one of the things that kind of put you on the map. It's not a, what was it? It's not a cookie.
It's not a cookie. It's not a cracker. He's Von Wafer. You know, I actually used that in the preseason on radio because, frankly, I was unsure. It was the last preseason game in Memphis, and he had a really big game against the Grizzlies. Ultimately, that's what made him make the team, was how well he played in that last preseason game up in Memphis. But I figured I'd use it then because I really didn't think he was going to make the roster. Ultimately he did. And then for about a 6-week stretch there was the T-Mac drama. There was the Ron Artest drama that was kind of going on simultaneously. He just kind of came out of nowhere. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah. And just kind of swinging back to this offseason, you were talking about, how the product on the floor is going to be a lot better. What's kind of been your overall thoughts on the Rockets offseason so far? I mean, of course, they had targets that they were, had at the top of their list going into the offseason as far as free agency. And, of course, as far as a head coach, what's kind of been your overall feel of the offseason so far? Because so far it seemed like it's been a huge success, especially when you factor in Summer League as well.
Well, I mean, you got to start with the coaching hire, right? I mean, Ime Udoka, if he wasn't the most coveted coach on the market, he was on the extreme short list, and the Rockets were able to get that done rather quickly. And I think it's pretty obvious at this point, even though he hasn't even technically coached a single game for the Rockets yet, because Ben Sullivan's been doing it all, that there is it's pretty obvious there's a new sheriff in town. I think that sort of has sort of jumped out with the way that the Rockets summer league team has performed. But we'll start there. I mean, the Rockets, that's who they were looking at and wanted, and got it done quickly. And so locked up, again, if he wasn't the most coveted coach on the market, he was on the extreme short list. And so they got their guy. And so I think from that perspective, A+. And then ultimately you move into the draft. He was frustrating and disappointing. Not necessarily to not get the top overall pick, because let's be honest, the Rockets only had a 14% chance of that happening. And I know everybody here obviously wanted the number 1 overall pick, right? I mean, I don't think there was a single basketball fan of any organization in the league who wasn't hoping that they would have a chance to draft Victor Wembanyama, right? And so, but relatively speaking, the odds were low. But what was frustrating and disappointing about it was that the Spurs, the team another team in your own division, ended up landing the guy, but some of the Rockets ultimately picked 4th. I think a lot of Rockets fans ultimately had hoped that they were slotted even higher than that. But at least from our opening impressions, amenthompson is going to be really good. That was, albeit only one summer league game, but that was a very impressive stint for him in that opening summer league game before he went down with the injury. And then Cam Whitmore, just a stroke of luck, right? I mean, just fell into their laps. At 20, we heard a couple of years ago, and we know for a fact that the Rockets really liked Alperen, and tried to trade up for him multiple times, much higher in the lottery, and ultimately made a move and got him where they did. But they projected him. They wanted him. They didn't think he was ever even going to last that long. And obviously, they tried to make a move for Cam Whitmore, who was mocked to the Rockets in a ton of early mock drafts, right? And then he just falls in their lap at 20. So the draft was, I think, a roaring success. as well. And so everything is going very nicely here so far in the offseason. Then you hit free agency, and obviously the Rockets had their top targets, and it appears as if they were able to secure 2 of their 3 guys that they ultimately wanted amongst their top 3 targets. The lone one who apparently got away was Brook Lopez. Yeah. But I think Fred VanVleet is a player that the Rockets need. He's a winner. He's a professional. He's extremely well respected. He's a guy who literally, and you hear the term grind a lot, but this dude literally had to grind his way to where he currently is, earned everything he's gotten in this league. And again, is extremely well respected. Got the floor general that they were looking for. This team has not been very good defensively the last 3 years whatsoever. Dylan Brooks certainly has some holes in his game, which I imagine at some point we'll probably discuss, but he is without a doubt a defensive player of the year, has defensive player of the year credentials. So he fills a need for the Rockets in that regard. And then again, ultimately from what we've seen with the Rockets Summer League, Jabari, who finished up his rookie season very well, just carry that over into the Summer League in his 2 games and was just dominant. I'm a huge fan of Tari Eason. I thought he was the Rockets' 3rd best player last year. He had a tremendous brief run in Summer League, and so that's a lot to get excited about. Again, we talked about Amenthompson. Cam Whitmore had a really good game the other night as well. And a lot of other guys, frankly, have stepped up in the Summer League too. So I think, yes, there is a lot. There's a lot to be excited about coming into the season.
Yeah, and also I just wanted to ask you about the draft, because of course you've been around basketball a long time. Can you just talk to how difficult it is to continue to hit on those mid-first round picks that Rafael Stone has hit on the last few years? I mean, you just talked about Tari Eason, you talked about Akeman, you talked about Cam Whitmore, even though that kind of did fall in their lap, but the only reason they had that pick was because of the trade they made the previous year and with the Eric Gordon trade. Can you just talk about how difficult that is? I mean, it's hard enough to get hit on picks at the top of the draft when you really don't have a lot of other options. You kind of know who you want to go with, but how hard is it to continue to hit on these type of players mid-first round?
It's extremely difficult because the further you get down the first round, the odds of players being rotation players, let alone significant contributors to your roster, significantly decrease. Historically speaking, obviously there are exceptions to every rule. I mean, first and foremost, Giannis, Dirk, right? Even Clint Capella, right? He's a guy who was drafted in the 20s. He's had a fantastic career, but historically speaking, the odds of that happening decrease with each draft slot as you work your way through the first round and ultimately into the second round. And so the fact that you've gotten players who look like they can be really good players for a very long time, and especially in the mid lottery, historically speaking, the odds are very low of that happening. And look, to ultimately win a championship, you have to hit at the top of the draft. Historically speaking, you have to hit at the top of the draft. But I think to have a sustained level of excellence, you have to find some diamonds in the rough as you move forward. And I think the Rockets have been able to do that. So yeah, it's been very tough. I think the Rockets have Cam Whitmore, they tried to trade up for him. Weren't able to it takes 2 to tango. Ultimately it never happened. And sometimes you do need just a stroke of luck. And I think that was a stroke of luck there. In regards to Sengun, as we've talked about, they tried to trade up. They actually made some moves to grab him. And then, Tari Eason was a guy who was mocked right around that area, and they were able to get him as well. So yeah, there's a little bit of skill, there's a little bit of luck, but yeah, when you find players like that mid lottery or mid first round and later on, that tends to give your franchise a pretty good foundation for your future.
Yeah, Craig, I love what you were saying about the foundation of young guys, because I'm really excited about like Jalen Green and Amenthompson and Jabari and Sengun, all those guys. But the fact that they were also able to bring in some veteran talent to kind of supplement that is what I'm super excited about, because I feel like those young guys are, like, you can't have a team with no veterans. And I know that's one of the things that we did talk about before. In order for these super young players, these 19, 20, 21-year-olds to reach their full potential, they need to see some guys on the team who've been there and done that. Guys who they respect, guys who can kind of show them the ropes, guys that can like get in their ear and let them know when they're not doing things the correct way. And the addition of Fred VanVleet, like, you see it already, like the work that he's doing with Jalen Green. It seemed like we see something different on social media daily with them working out. I just think that leadership right there is actually going to accelerate his development. So, and then like you said, bringing in Dylan Brooks. I know he has some flaws to his game, but I know one thing for sure is he's going to be able to like really help Jabari and help Tari with like defensive assignments and where to be and how to communicate. And so I think Stone had a very good summer. I know some people were not excited about like the trades as far as like giving up the second round picks and the amount that they put on the contracts as far as like what they got paid, Fred VanVleet and Dylan Brooks. But I'm of the opinion that I'm going to wait to see how this plays out, because I do value what he did. And I know that as far as like what this team needed and what this team was so desperately lacking, he added that. And so, yeah, I'm very much looking forward to this upcoming season.
Yeah, I mean, like Jock Landale's a solid player. Don't forget about Uncle Jeff coming back.
Yes.
I think he's going to be a significant presence in the locker room. And then ultimately what all this does is that it raises the level of competition in practice, in games. It forces these young guys to take a step forward. And let's be honest, there are still plenty of areas in which these young guys have to improve, because this has been a 20-win team for 3 consecutive years. And so these guys have to get better. And I think it raises that level of competition in practice, gives them a sense of urgency that if they don't make strides and improve and contribute more to winning, then ultimately their playing time and roles will be reduced, because there's somebody who is there who's already sort of been there, done that. And frankly, I think, and again, the competition will hopefully continue to keep that same kind of pressure on the veterans as well. And ultimately, that's what this is about. And I mentioned earlier, I mean, look, how many games this team ultimately wins this season, and they're going to win more games. I think that is an absolute given. But how many more games they ultimately win this season will be determined by whether or not, like, this is the third year for Sengun and Green. This is a huge season for them. It's a pivotal season, as it is for the vast majority of young players. Again, there are always exceptions to the rule, but typically players pretty much become who they are for the rest of their careers by that third season. And so they have to take steps forward, because let's be honest, they have generational wealth sitting there waiting for them if they ultimately do. And the organization needs them to take steps forward to ultimately continue to get better as the years progress. So, yeah, I think that the mix is a good mix. I think these young guys will be pushed. Hopefully these young guys will continue to push the veterans as well. It appears as if, based on what we've seen so far, that there's not going to be much stock from Ime Udoka and his coaching staff put into what guys are taking home in their paychecks. It's ultimately going to be based on performance. And so hopefully everyone can raise the level of play of each other. And with that, the whole group can rise, and this team can improve, and the young guys can play in some more high leverage situations to gain some more experience. And we find out ultimately who they are.
And I loved Jalen Green's answer. He was on the interview during the summer league, and they asked him, what did he think about those trades, right? And as you know, he lost those. He even said it. I lost some of my best friends, but I think that they'll have better opportunities where they're going. And he felt like the trades and the guys that they brought in is actually going to help improve the team. So I feel like that's a maturity from him that I won't say that we haven't seen, but like he's getting older. He's gonna have to like start taking this job a little more seriously, and I think that you're starting to see that. Like we didn't see a whole lot of like the stuff that we're seeing from him this summer. We didn't see a whole lot of that the first 2 off seasons, and now like he was really close with KJ Martin. You would always see them together. He was really close with Josh Christopher. You see them together quite frequently. So for him to have that maturity to look at those trades and the fact that those guys are no longer on the team and still see that that's going to probably be good for like everybody involved. Like to me, that says a lot about where his mind is right now. Like this isn't, yeah, it's fun. It's basketball. It's a sport, but this is also your job. And part of your job is to eventually compete for championships and win basketball games. And I was just very like happy to hear that that's what he was thinking.
Yeah. In his 3rd season in the league. So this is a really important year for Green and Sengun, I think in particular. Not quite as much as Jabari Smith, but I think we need to see more of a continuation from what we saw from him in the second half of last season, moving into his 2nd season in the league. And again, I think that just the sort of the level of competition, I mean, I think it's going to ultimately, hopefully, raise the floor of everyone. And then again, depending on where these young guys, how much of a step forward, how much of a leap these guys can make, ultimately, I think will determine whether or not this is a team that is this a play-in team? Can this team sneak into the top 8 because the West is really, 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 really tough? Are they not going to be a play-in team? I think all of this ultimately hinges on the improvement of all the young players on this roster, and the veterans are there to help them get there. And so hopefully all of it will work out in that regard.
I mean, talking about one of the veterans, I want to talk a little bit more about Dillon Brooks. And of course, we saw all the things that went down with him last season and with the Memphis Grizzlies and some of the antics sometimes that may have gotten in the way of his overall play. But do you ultimately think that he's one of those type of players where you love him on your team, like a Patrick Beverly, who we saw up close and personal here in Houston? Do you think the positives just outweigh the negatives when you kind of just break down his game overall?
I think ultimately Rockets fans will accept him. Rockets fans accepted Austin Rivers, right? So
sure, yeah.
Jason Terry, took Jason Terry in.
Yeah, Jason, yeah, the longtime Mav, for sure. Fans I think ultimately will accept that. Yeah, I mean, I think they're gonna ultimately accept Dillon Brooks. Hopefully, I think that no one questions his tenacity and the edge in which he plays with, because I mean, you mentioned Pat Beverly. There are other guys in the league who need to play with. I mean, look, Russell Westbrook plays with a little bit of an edge as well, and it kind of walks. These players sort of walk a fine line, right, between needing that to be who they ultimately are, and then if they tend to step over that, then things they can get a little bit hairy. And we've seen that with Pat. We've seen that with Russell Westbrook. Dillon Brooks is the same way. I mean, that's what he has needed to achieve what he's been able to achieve professionally when it comes to this sport. I guess one of the big criticisms with him is the amount of shots that he ultimately takes in his shot selection, and hopefully that will improve with this team. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think one of his biggest criticisms were he probably took, for a team that had a lot of guys who could score the ball. I think a lot of Grizzlies fans probably felt like he shot the ball too much with Memphis. And so hopefully some of that can change here with this coaching staff and this group and this scheme and ultimately his role. But his job here is to give this team a defensive mentality and improve an area that has been rock bottom for 3 consecutive seasons. And I think his shot selection and his shot quantity aside, he absolutely will bring that element to this team. And that's something that this group desperately needed. And not to mention Fred VanVleet will also help in that regard. I know there's been a lot of criticism of Alperensengun and whether or not he ultimately can be a backstop that you can count on moving forward. And look, he needs to improve in that area. But I think another area that the Rockets need drastic improvement on is point of attack defense. And I think both Brooks and VanVleet And Amenthompson, with his just raw ability and skills package, I think ultimately will help very much in that regard. And if the Rockets can defend better in terms of their point of attack defense, one would assume, right, that the rest of the defense would improve. They should, in theory, not turn the ball over as much this year with Van Fleet as they've had. They've been rock bottom in the league, and that for pretty much for the last 3 years as well, which has led to a very porous transition defense. So hopefully all of the strengths of these guys that they have brought in will help in some of the significant weaknesses we've seen from this group over the last 3 seasons.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you about one other player before we, get to the end of the show. A player that, in my opinion, has been probably, if not the best, top 2 player on the team the last few years. Even though, like you said, they've only been winning 20 games every year. But it's Kevin Porter Jr. Of course, his role is going to change this upcoming season. More than likely, he'll be coming off the bench. But do you think that ultimately that will help him in his overall efficiency and being a player that doesn't have as much on his shoulders going forward, that he'll actually play a better brand of basketball coming off the bench as a 6th man?
First of all, if you asked a lot of people who have been around him, they'd probably say very similar things, that he's been very professional and very easy and pleasant to deal with. He's a nice guy. I like him. And I think he's very, very talented. He's obviously a tremendous catch and shoot 3-point shooter. He's put up some really good numbers since he's been in Houston. Perhaps he's been miscast a little bit because he wasn't originally a point guard, and it was something the Rockets, when they sent him down to the G League originally, that was what they wanted him to work on. And ultimately, over the last 3 years, this was about, again, developing young players and succeeds at. Again, I think he's a really talented guy. I think he's sort of somebody who has been forgotten a little bit, I think, by most people in terms of where this team is going to be moving forward. I know he's got a lot of supporters in the Rockets front office. I hope that ultimately the coaching staff can play more to his strengths in whatever new role he is going to have. I think most people suspect he's going to be coming off the bench. I think he has an opportunity, if that is indeed his role, to really cook against other teams' second units. Because if you look at what I think most people are projecting the Rockets starting lineup to be, and you put that starting lineup up against, let's just talk about the West, the starting lines that they're going to end up facing in the West. You look at that and you're like, there's a lot of starting 5s in the West at this point who are probably better than the Rockets starting 5 group. But I think that second unit has a chance to really, really be good this upcoming season with the players that they have. And so I think if Kevin indeed is in that role, I think he's going to thrive in it. I thought he was going to have a big year last year. He did. The Rockets, again, as you mentioned, they weren't great with him, but when he was out with the injury, they were significantly worse without him. He was the team's second best player last year. And in my opinion, Sengun was the best player on the roster. He was the second best. Tari Eason, in my opinion, was the third best player on the team last year. And when Kevin wasn't around, the team was not as good. And so I think he's a guy who gets some unfair criticism, and I'm looking forward to how he is able to work and hopefully thrive at his new role, especially under this new coaching staff.
Craig, I loved everything you just said, because I was just talking about this a few days ago. I think that like if we project the starters to be, and this is just projection, of course, we don't know, Fred VanVleet, Jalen Green, Dylan Brooks, Jabari Smith, and Alperensengun, that bench unit has a potential to be very special.
Really good.
I think if you're coming off the bench with Kevin Porter Jr., Amenthompson, Tari Eason, and Jason Tate, I think that bench unit is going to give that starting unit a run for their money in practice every single day. In fact, I feel like that bench unit on some days are going to win, because you have like Amenthompson, and like you said, from what we've seen from him, just the intangibles he brings to the game, his sheer athleticism, his feel, and then you pair that with Kevin Porter Jr., who, like you said, is an outstanding catch and shoot 3-point shooter, who also in his own right is a really good playmaker. Then you have the hustle, the heart, the grit of Tari Eason and Jason Tate in that unit as well. Oh my goodness, yeah.
And you have the ability to play a little bit differently as well if you decide to play Landale at the 5 with that group. You have a little more of that vertical spacing, pick and roll type of game. I really think the Rockets. I think with the Rock ultimately, as we sit right now, I think the Rockets' second unit has a chance to be amongst the best second units in the league. I think they're going to be really, really good because I think they have a lot of guys who do a lot of things that they complement each other very well in terms of their roles and so forth. And I think the Rockets' second unit has the potential to be outstanding this year.
And it's a stark contrast to and no disrespect to those guys. And Lachard will tell you, like, I sat on this show many a times and I talked about how much of a fan of Josh Christopher I am and Usman Garuba and some of the other guys that we were bringing off the bench. But like, I mean, this is a huge improvement from a Daishen Nix, Josh Christopher, Usman Garuba bench unit. And I'm leaving out KJ because he did end up starting at the end of the year. But
I will admit, losing KJ hurt me personally. I loved watching that guy play.
Yeah, KJ was KJ, like, you could see a difference when KJ started with that team. Like, they were a completely different team. So yeah, he's a huge loss. And so I'm just wishing KJ the best wherever we're with the Clippers. And then of course, I don't know, Ty. I kind of feel like Ty has something. I think he'll stick in the league. I think he's with OKC right now.
They ultimately were sent to Oklahoma City. I think what he played finally was able to play yesterday.
Played last night, yeah. He only made like two shots last night and had like 2 assists. But yeah, I'm keeping up with those guys. I'm kind of invested to kind of see how their career goes. But losing them, like you said, it hurt. But like, I'm also seeing like the potential of this iteration of the Rockets is just way above what we saw last year.
Yeah, no, they're absolutely going to be better. And again, how much so? I honestly, I can't sit here and tell you. I don't know. I really don't know. But they are going to be better, and they're going to be better defensively. They have a much more talented top 10 or 11 than what we've seen in the last 3 seasons. Again, I think the win total is completely contingent on how much better are Jalen Green, alperensengun, Tari Eason, Jabari Smith, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Ultimately, I think that will determine what this team's win total is and what this team's ceiling is going to be this upcoming season. Because again, you look at the Western Conference. There's so many good teams. I mean, there's so much depth and talent in the league now that like Utah got off to a great start last year, and Markkanen was an all-star, and they still ultimately fell short of the play-in. The Lakers had an awesome. I thought they had an awesome summer, and they're going to be really good as long as the Clippers are healthy. They're going to be outstanding. You get the defending champs. Golden State's not going anywhere, and as long as those guys are still breathing and playing. So yeah, the West. Memphis. It's not going to help their cause to not have Ja Morant early in the season because of suspension. But Memphis is really, really talented. Dallas is very good. If Zion Williamson stays healthy, and I know that's a big if. I think New Orleans is really, really good too. So there are a lot of really good teams in the West, and so I don't want to put a win total or anything like this, but I think ultimately the ceiling of this team will be determined by how much improved these young guys ultimately are this year, and that's what I'm most looking forward to. As frankly, I've been the last 3 seasons because it's been about okay, who are these guys, and can they improve from day one to the end of the season? And I think that has absolutely been the case. These guys have gotten better, and can they take that next step forward? And we'll see.
And just one more question before we wrap up the show. Of course, the Rockets will play in the semifinals tomorrow against Utah.
Summer League juggernaut.
Summer League juggernaut.
Tell you something. Some of these other guys, look, Tari and Jabari aren't playing anymore, but Nate Hitton has been really good.
Yeah, Trevor Hudgens. Yeah,
Jermaine Samuels, Matt Mayer. I mean, Days has played well. Trevor Hudgens is a bucket. These guys are good. I mean, these guys have been so I know the Rockets still have some roster spots available. And I think these guys have certainly helped their cause with their play in the Summer League.
And how much do you think that? I mean, of course, it's summer league at the end of the day, but how much do you think this helps their overall confidence if they're able to go out and win a championship, especially a player like Cam Whitmore, who may spend some time in the G League just to get playing time, but eventually will be with the Rockets at some point, and other players who may not even play with the Rockets, but they are auditioning for other teams throughout the NBA. How much do you think this will mean, to be able to win a summer league champion?
I mean, I think to those guys who are playing, especially the guys who are in summer league for the first time, it will mean something to them. You realize some of these guys, what they had a couple of these guys, right, where they were they've been with the Vipers, and the Vipers have been ridiculous again, as you well know. Lachard the last couple of seasons winning a championship and then losing last year in the finals. So they've tasted a lot of success, but I think what ultimately Summer League championships, I don't think, obviously in the grand scheme of things, don't mean a whole lot. Just like winning all your preseason games don't necessarily mean a lot. What you don't want is to have a lot of young guys that you're expecting to be parts of your future to flop in the Summer League, and none of that has happened. So that's positive. You don't want those guys to look like they don't belong in the preseason either. But I think what they've already accomplished, and whether or not they win this Summer League title or not, I think a tone has been set. I think I kind of started with this at the top of the show. A tone has been set by this new coaching staff that this is sort of a new era. And as Rafael has described, phase 2 of this process, that a tone has been set that things are going to be a little bit different around here moving forward. And I think ultimately, if they do win a Summer League championship, I think that's something that they can carry over into training camp in the preseason. Quite honestly, even if they don't win the Summer League title, if they lose tomorrow to Utah, or they win tomorrow and advance to the finals, the championship game, and lose there, I think they've already accomplished what they wanted to accomplish with this group in the Summer League, and I think it will. I think this group. I think the energy. I know the vibe is kind of an overused phrase these days, and maybe I'm a little too old to continue to use it, but the vibes will be good. I think they already are. And so I think that will set the tone for a spirited training camp. And I think that's what this group needs, is to hit the ground running when things really count.
And speaking of setting the tone, I think, like you said, like even if they don't win it all, they've checked all the boxes. Like Tari Eason came in last summer, and he looked great last summer, and it was very eye opening. It's like, okay, I think this guy is ready, and he kind of forced his way into the rotation. Jabari did not look ready, right? And this year, Jabari was like the best player in summer league. Jabari averaged like 35 points per game those first 2 games, and he just looked completely dominant. He was out there.
His confidence seems to be so much higher now. Yeah,
and the stuff he was pulling off on the court is like are like things that I wasn't even expecting him to be able to do yet. And so, like you said, like Tari Eason box checked, the Jabari Smith box has been checked. Cam Whitmore came in, and he had some ups and downs, but like 8 steals the last game.
The record.
He had 8 steals, and then
he's so physically gifted. He's going to be a good player.
Yes. So like I think, like you said, the tone has been set for like when they go into training camp, and I think these guys are going to be riding a sky high confidence, and like that's what you wanted to get out of summer league. I think like whether or not they win the championship or not is kind of secondary. Hopefully they do, because I'm sure that's what they want. But I'm super encouraged, because we saw some things from Jabari that we were not able to see last summer, and then like I've seen Cam Whitmore has improved. Like and he even spoke about how he felt more comfortable. He felt like the game is slowing down for him already. And this is a guy who just turned 19 like a week ago.
Yeah, he had another. The Rockets don't have that one year they had 5 19-year-olds on the team. I think he'll be looks like he'll be the lone guy who's going to be a teenager as all these Jalen Green and Alperensengun. These guys are old men now at 20, but 2021. I think ultimately the goal from this new staff was to set a sort of a different tone, and I think that's what the offseason was ultimately all about, in terms of just generally speaking with the coaches, the veterans, the draft. You want to sort of raise the floor of this team, and hopefully as a collective group they can all sort of improve and rise up and get better together. I don't think anybody is thinking that this team is going to win a championship this year because they aren't. But it's about forward progress and taking steps forward and taking steps forward. I think all of the pieces there are in place for this team to take a big step forward this year.
And I didn't even mention Amenthompson either. Like, I think he and his brother, I don't know if you've been watching.
His brother's been really good.
But like they are, yes. And so, like, I don't know if people know this, but they put up like eerily similar stats at OTE. Even though they played a game like very differently, they put up almost identical stats as far as points, rebounds, steals, assists, like all of that stuff. And so, like, I've been keeping a very keen eye on what Ozar's been doing over there with the Pistons. And then after seeing like how great Amen looked his first game, you know, I think those guys are like proven. I know one of the knocks on them coming into the draft was that they came from that OTE, you know, play style and that league, and it wasn't a very good league. But I guess when you're 6'7" and you have freakish athleticism and you have a 7-foot wingspan and you can jump out the gym and you have, you know, high basketball IQ, I think they're going to be fine.
Yeah, those two young men have been really impressive. Really impressive. Look, I've admitted this before, and I'll admit it again. The one area where my one weakness when it comes to this sport is that I really have very little reference points when it comes to the draft. I don't pay a whole lot of attention. I'm not watching. I didn't watch a single second of OTE basketball. I don't really watch these guys play overseas. I don't watch a ton of college basketball either because my focus is all on the Rockets and the NBA, and so I don't really watch a ton of it. So I don't have a ton. My base of knowledge when it comes to draft prospects are very low, so I tend to lean in on what I tend to read and guys like you pay attention to and so forth. But these two have been very impressive. Have you guys booked your hotels in Detroit for June of 2026?
Not yet, no.
Hey, it's a possibility. You know, I have to look into that.
I'm sure there's still time to get a good hotel room price in Detroit 3 summers from now. So, but no, I think Sar's been really, really impressive. I mean, he's sort of a Swiss Army knife.
Yes.
You know, he's done everything well, defensively, rebounding. Man, and that's one reason why I told you it's really going to hurt to not have KJ on this team because I love watching him play because he's just such a freak athlete. I'm looking forward to watching amenthompson because he and his brother, those guys are freak athletes. So it should be a lot of fun watching those guys try to punish the rim as much as KJ has attempted to do so over his 3 years in the league. So
maybe we can get one more like iconic call out of you this year. Like before we let you go, but like my favorite one, I don't know, you'll remember it probably right away when James Harden had Wesley Johnson isolated and he
clean up on out. Yeah.
You know that that was actually a little bit of a mistake on my behalf. Have I told you guys this story?
No.
I know
you did tell us last time, but definitely.
Okay. Not to bore everybody because we're like 50 minutes into this thing, but briefly, that was the season. Obviously, the Rockets were killing everybody. It was the year Chris Paul got off to 28-4 start. They were just rolling through teams, and Chris was just, you know, they would set those high screens and get Chris matched up on teams opposing centers, and he was just destroying them. Like it was like not even fair. And there was there was a game or two before where we were in Utah, and Chris Paul got switched up on Rudy Gobert, and just, I mean. And you know what? I'm a big Gobert fan. I really am. I know there are a lot of people that have been down on him since he was traded to Minnesota, but I am a huge Gobert fan. I do think he's a guy who absolutely positively contributes to winning. And I know Ryan Hollins and I have had our disputes, and you guys may disagree with me as well about when Rudy and Donovan Mitchell were with Utah, who was the best player for the Utah Jazz, and I say Rudy, and Ryan says Donovan, and I guess we can have this argument another time. So, but he just absolutely cooked Gobert, and so I can't remember at the time. I realized that I was like I got into a little bit of a rut, you know, describing things a certain way, and I was like, you know, I got to change things up a little bit, and so when that play happened in LA with Harden, I just sometimes you get kind of caught up in the moment. Like honestly, last year when Şengün had that big dunk that wasn't in San Antonio, I got to be honest, I screwed that call up. I still think about it. I was so upset with myself when it happened because I just got too caught up in the moment and got way too excited, and I got to realize I got to kind of keep the volume, the level of my voice down a little bit. And I kind of got caught up on that a little bit. It should have been aisle 13 as opposed to 3 because I was thinking of Chris Paul. And so I know a lot of people enjoyed that. Me personally, I wish I kind of had that back a little bit, but you know what? Sometimes you do kind of get caught up in the moment. You're still a fan of the sport, and sometimes that happens. But no, thank you. I appreciate it.
Man, it did not seem like a mistake to me. I would have never known that until you said that. To me, that was like your most iconic call of all time.
You'd be surprised how much like I am my worst critic. There's no question about it. Obviously, when you have a job like this, there are going to be people who love you. There are going to be people who hate you. You just sort of have to expect that and deal with it. I don't get a ton of hate. But the times that I do, everybody has a right to their own opinion. But no one, trust me, no one is as much of a critic of me than I am. Like it's hard to describe, but like when you're, it's like, it's like all of us played sports on some level at some point, right? So when you had a really good game, that feeling, and that when there's a certain like rhythm that you get into, and sometimes you just don't have much of a rhythm. And there are some games where I'm like, oh man, I was just absolutely terrible. And it just really, really, really bothers me because if I make a mistake, obviously it's public. You don't want to have, you prefer not to be criticized for some mistakes, but it happens. And so, but yeah, I am my worst critic, and I am very hard on myself. And so, I try if I make some mistakes. Most of the time they're not noticeable to most people, but they are to me. I try to make sure I don't make those same mistakes again. So,
well, I mean, I definitely want to say, I mean, it's not easy making 20-win seasons actually fun. So we definitely appreciate you the last few years and all the years, because I've been listening to you since you first started on the radio. So I definitely appreciate it. I appreciate you coming back on the show again, taking out the time. It's always a blast having you on, and we will definitely have you back on at some point, probably in off season, because I know once the season starts, you're going and coming. So you don't really have a lot of time, but we appreciate you coming on the show, and you definitely one of the best, if not the best broadcasters out there.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Hat tip again to both you guys. You do an incredible job covering the team and supporting the organization. And but yeah, I appreciate it. Anytime, happy to be on. And again, we'll keep our fingers crossed, and hopefully, this season goes as we hope it will, in terms of a significant step forward and continued optimism for the future. So they got a good group here. Should be a fun team. I mean, I kind of check out a little bit once our season ends, whenever the season ends, because you just kind of live this for 6 months. Mm-hmm. Once the finals come around, and especially once the finals are over, I'm ready to get back at it. And then the rest of the summer tends to drag on, especially when you hit August and summer league is over, and the months of August and September just seem to take forever. But yeah, I'm excited. I'm ready to get back to work. The Rockets have already released their preseason schedule. So, looking forward to that. And ultimately the regular season schedule when it comes out to see, I will say this, with the team being bad the last 3 seasons, we've had a chance to work all 82, especially since you work the TV. Hopefully we'll have a chance that we won't have too many national TV exclusives, because I love what I do. And if I can work every game, that's what I want to do. So I'm excited.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, thank you for coming on. We definitely appreciate it. Vader, my co-host, as usual, I appreciate it.
Oh, this is always a pleasure to get on here and talk about my favorite basketball team and the sport I love. And then having Craig Ackerman on, shoot, like I wish we could do longer, but I know nobody's going to watch 2 hours of
I could probably talk for 2 hours. So yeah, we probably could keep going here, but no, I thank you for having me on as always. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, for sure. And we appreciate everybody that joins us every week. That checks us out on Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your audio podcast. Of course, always checking us out on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to the channel because we're going to have a lot more great shows coming up this off season. We appreciate everybody that joins us every single week. And make sure you check out the next episode of Rocket Fuel Podcast.